Hello to everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to view our presentation today. We will be focusing on the Afghan culture along with the effects on Afghan refugees who suffer from the mental illness post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. To begin our discussion today, we will begin by visiting points 1 through 4 on our presentation guidelines. The word Afghan historically has been used to designate the members of an ethnic group, also called the Pashtuns, but Afghanistan is multicultural and multi-ethnic. The state was formed by the political expansion of Pashtun tribes in the middle of the 18th century, but was not unified until the end of the 19th century. The experience of exile shared by millions of refugees may have given rise to a new national feeling. Afghanistan is a landlocked Asian country of approximately 251,825 square miles and is bordered by Pakistan, Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and China. Summers are dry and hot, while winters are cold with heavy snowfall in the highlands. Precipitation is low, although some areas of the east are affected by monsoons. Demographically, there are really no reliable census figures, but in 1997, the population was estimated to be 23,738,000. The great majority of people are rural, and most live in larger towns, which include Jalalabad, Kunduz, Baghlan, and Ghazni. Except for a few Hindu, Sikh, and Jewish minorities that have left the country, all of the people are Muslims, and that is divided into two subsections, which are Sunnis, which are about 85%, and Shiites, about 15%. There has been a huge refugee population outside of the country since 1978, numbering over 6 million in 1990. It constituted the largest refugee population in the world. Although many have returned after the fall of the communist regime in April of 1992, several million Afghan refugees are still in Pakistan, Iran, and the Arabian Peninsula. Some middle-class persons and intellectuals have settled in the West. Many of the inhabitants are bilingual or trilingual in all the major languages spoken in the neighboring countries. The official languages are Persian, which is officially called Dari, and Pashto. Both belong to the Iranian group of the Indo-European family. The old flag of green, white, and black horizontal stripes has been abandoned, and there is no national anthem. Everyday food consists of flatbread cooked on an iron plate in the fire or on the inner walls of a clay oven. Yogurt and other dairy products such as butter, cream, and dried buttermilk are an important element in the diet, as are onions, peas and beans, dried fruits, and nuts. Rice is eaten in some areas and in urban settlements. Scrambled eggs prepared with tomatoes and onions is a common meal. Food is cooked with various types of oils, including the fats of a sheep's tail. Common beverages are water, buttermilk, and tea. Afghans use the right hand to eat from a bowl on the floor. At home, when there are no guests, men and women share meals, but while at gatherings, men and women eat in a separate area. The common Islamic food prohibitions are respected in Afghanistan. For example, meat is only eaten from animals that are slaughtered according to Islamic law. Alcohol, pork, and wild boar are not consumed, although some people secretly make wine for consumption at home. Wheat is the principal crop, followed by rice, barley, and corn. The main cash crops are almonds and fruits. Virtually all manufactured goods are imported, and they are financed by remittances from refugees and immigrants. Social stratification is expressed primarily through marriage patterns. The general tendency is for lower social groups to give their daughters in marriage to higher social groups. The lavishness of a wedding is an indicator of status and wealth. Following Taliban decree, men must wear a hat or be turbaned and bearded. The Taliban control most of the country, and their government is recognized only by Pakistan, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. The Taliban rule without a constitution, relying on the Quran and its readings to serve as the law of the land. There is an informal assembly around their leader in Kandahar. At the local level, the military commanders rule groups of villages, a situation the Taliban have never tried to end. Afghanistan does not have a unified government. Political parties linked to the resistance include Sunni and Shiite have developed during the war, but now they have imperfectly merged in the two remaining factions, the Taliban and the Northern Alliance. Military commanders have the real leadership. In their drive to purify society, the Taliban emphasize moral values. No distinction is made between religious and civil laws. Those who commit adultery and consume drugs and alcohol are severely punished. Beatings, amputations, and public executions, including beheading, stoning, and shooting, are commonly practiced. Tens of thousands of persons are jailed without trial by various factions. The Taliban are backed by Pakistan, while the Northern Alliance is supported by Iran and the former Soviet republics in Central Asia. Military activity is intense, particularly in the spring and summer. Male and female roles are strongly differentiated. The public sphere is the domain of the men, and the domestic sphere is the realm of the women. Women take care of the young children, cook for the household, and clean the house. They may have a small garden or raise a few chickens. They weave and sew, and in some areas they make rugs and felt. Among nomad women, they make tents and have more freedom of movement. In a peasant family, men look after sheep and goats, plow, harvest, thresh, and winter the crops. Among both rural and urban people, a man must not stay home during the day. Marriage is considered an obligation, and divorce is rare and stigmatized. Polygamy is allowed if all the wives are treated equally. However, it is uncommon and occurs primarily when a man feels obligated to marry the widow of his dead brother. The general pattern is to marry kin, although families try to diversify their social assets through marriage. The incidence of unions between cousins is high. Traditionally, the basic household consists of a man, his wife, his sons with their spouses and children, and his unmarried daughters. When he dies, the sons can decide to stay united or divide the family assets. Since modern medical facilities are limited, people rely on traditional practices that employ herbs and animal products. Every physical ailment is classified as warm or cold, and its cure depends on restoring the body's equilibrium by ingesting foods with the opposite properties. Another way to cure disease is to undertake a pilgrimage to the shrine. Sometimes pilgrims put a pinch of sand collected from the holy place in their tea. Certain springs are considered holy, and their water is believed to have a curative effect. Talismans, or charms, are sewn onto clothing or hats to protect against the evil eye or treat an illness. Beliefs about preserving health include personal, daily hygiene, or washing before a prayer. Regular exercise, eating fresh food, and a balanced diet, staying warm, and getting enough rest are also seen as important for health. Religious rituals and customs at birth and death are important. One Afghan birth custom involves having an adult male be the first to speak to a newborn infant. This male, who becomes a special person in the infant's life, whispers a secret blessing in the ear of the child. Afghans may prefer to decrease sedation at the time of death so that the patient is able to hear the final part of the same blessing he or she heard at birth. The final part of the blessing, which is also called the kalima, or confession of the faith, should be the last thing one hears at death. Illness and healing are viewed as being at God's will. Illnesses can be healed through reading the Quran. Most will take relevant verses from the Quran, and those verses are written down and carried around by the sick. A strong cultural stigma is attached to mental illness. Many mental health conditions, such as depression, may not be considered an illness. There is a strong stigma attached to men having a mental illness, as it is seen as a sign of weakness. Please remember that the term Afghani relates to money and is insulting when used to describe the Afghanistan's ethnicity. Afghan is the correct term for describing ethnicity. According to the United States Census in 2013, there were 2.6 million Afghanistan refugees in the U.S. Over one-third of all refugee arrivals in 2015 came from Near East South Asia, a region that includes Iraq, Iran, Bhutan, and Afghanistan. The most common ailments seen in refugees to the United States from Afghanistan are caused by malnutrition and include diarrhea, acute respiratory infection, and the measles. Of Afghan refugees, 41% had dental cavities, 39% had dermatological disorders, 36% had intestinal parasites, 23% had gastrointestinal disorders, and 12% had joint and back pain. Afghan Americans that have been in the U.S. longer tend to have higher rates of heart disease and mental health related problems. There is a high incidence of post-traumatic stress disorder in Afghan refugees due to witnessing the loss of family and homes in Afghanistan. Afghan refugees can suffer from culture shock due to changes in family roles, cultural isolation, and changing social status. We will now focus on points 5 through 8 of our presentation guidelines. Time. People in the Afghan culture tend to focus on the past and/or present to make decisions about healthcare. They do not focus on the future. Space. Afghans do not mix between genders unless within the same family. People in the Afghan culture prefer to maintain a close proximity with members of the same gender when interacting. This builds trusting relationships. However, men and women cannot touch under any circumstances. Social organization. Family is sacred and extremely important in the Afghan culture. Professional women do not exist. The women are responsible for the household duties, while the men are responsible for financially maintaining the household. It is very common in the Afghan culture for marriages to be arranged by the families based on tribe, status, network, and wealth. When the son gets married, he and his wife begin their life as a married couple in his family's home in their separate bedroom. Biological variations. There are high rates of genetically predetermined diseases among the Afghan culture because of the high consanguinity rates. The following are diseases and conditions that people of Afghanistan origin are predisposed to: G6PD deficiency, sickle cell anemia, thalassemia, coronary heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, tuberculosis, malaria, and hepatitis. Gender role expectations. Women should avoid looking at men in the eyes. Women must wear loose-fitting pants under their shirts, so that the definition of her legs cannot be seen. In public, they also wear headscarves. It is inappropriate for men to initiate conversation with a woman or to ask another man about his wife. Men and women should never have any source of physical contact under any circumstances. More women are employed in the medical field since only women can provide medical care for other women. Social factors affecting healthcare. War. Afghanistan is still recovering from years of war that left the healthcare system in poor conditions. Economics. All those years of war also affected the economy. The Ministry of Public Health gives grants to non-governmental organizations to provide healthcare to the area. However, this is not an organized healthcare system because these organizations can leave when their contract is up, ending all care being provided. About 70% of Afghanistans live in extreme poverty. Infrastructure. There is a major lack of this in Afghanistan. Roadways are poor and transportation is not good. According to an article we read, only 30% of cities have clean water sources. That means that 70% of the cities in Afghanistan do not have access to clean water. This results in a lot of hospital visits. The healthcare centers and hospitals in Afghanistan have outdated equipment, and a lot of the workers are not properly trained. There are also a lack of beds in the hospitals, which causes diseases to spread while visiting. Environmental factors affecting healthcare. Endemic disease. The wars had a mental effect on the civilization of scattered parts of Afghanistan. Studies show that the rates of people who had PTSD, anxiety, and/or depression were significantly higher than other countries. There are also a lot of landmines and improvised explosive devices placed in healthcare centers, killing a lot of healthcare workers and closing the centers down. For our final discussion, we will touch on points 9 through 12 of our presentation guidelines. What comes to your mind when you hear the words post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD? Many Americans typically think about war veterans who have been deployed and have taken part in live combat. PTSD, as defined by Tabor's Medical Dictionary, is an intense psychological distress marked by horrifying memories, recurring fears, and feelings of helplessness that develop after a psychological traumatic event, such as the experience of combat, criminal assault, life-threatening accidents, natural disasters, or rape. People from Afghanistan have been forced into refugee status since as early as 1978. The United States has become the home to nearly 2,000 Afghan refugees between October 2015 and February 2016. North Carolina has become the home to approximately 500 Afghan refugees in the last 8 years. Many of these refugees suffer from PTSD due to being exposed to war where they lived. This has left these people with social and occupational deficits. Risk factors for PTSD include poverty, exposure to war, the traumatic relocation to America, and general trauma such as family violence, including physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Prior to relocation to America, many Afghans have been the victims of beatings from militia and armed personnel or witnessed others being victimized. Broken bones, unmeasurable blood loss, and emotional scars haunt these people even with medical interventions. Many Afghan refugees that have PTSD have many somatic complaints. Recurring headaches, generalized body aches, malaise, and fever are quite common among them. Sleep disturbances that manifest as nightmares are also quite frequent. When it comes to Afghans in healthcare, there is a lot to be considered, especially when it comes to mental health. First and foremost, whenever providing healthcare to anyone who is of another culture, it is best that the provider briefly familiarize himself with that culture. Another very important thing to consider is getting an interpreter of the same sex to assist with communication. The healthcare provider being of the same sex as the patient is also quite important, especially if a physical exam is going to be performed. When it comes to communication, there are a few things to consider. The discussion of any type of personal problem with non-family members is uncommon, so until a trusting bond has been established between the provider and patient, it may be difficult to address any issues that may be going on. Aside from verbal communication, written communications, such as instructions or informative pamphlets, need to be in the specific language that the patient prefers. Afghanistan has a few different languages used throughout the country. Misinterpretation of the patient's tone is also common. Women tend to speak in a louder tone amongst each other, which may be misconstrued as arguing. A major issue that Afghan refugees have when it comes to PTSD and getting the care they need is the lack of insurance. Medical treatment of mental health issues can be very costly. Medications, cognitive behavioral therapy, interpersonal therapy, family therapy, and psychodynamic therapy can be quite costly. Many of these people also have low-paying jobs due to facing discrimination during the hiring process due to their heritage and English proficiency. When selecting treatment options for Afghans, it is very important to include the patient in the decision-making process. Each and every culture has their own beliefs and traditions. Asking who typically makes decisions for the family is important. Allowing the patient to perform and take part in their cultural traditions that promote health and wellness in addition to the treatment options prescribed are important. Although mental health issues are prevalent in this group of people, many choose not to seek medical attention for their PTSD. Healthcare workers should know that if an Afghan comes to seek mental health treatment, it is as a last resort. As discussed previously, they do not like to share their personal problems with non-family members. When they seek medical attention, they fear that their problems will be discussed with others by the healthcare provider. The explanation of HIPAA laws to these patients would be of the utmost importance. Another important factor for the healthcare provider is to consider that Afghans believe that seeking help with their PTSD is seen as shame in their families. As Dr. Anita Tesh described in her PowerPoint presentation, there are 3 different ways in which countries are interconnected: the movement of people, the movement of things, and the movement of ideas. People go to different countries for short and long-term reasons. The refugees immigrated to the United States left their own country to live in another permanently. Some people travel to Afghanistan on missions for short-term stays, and others, such as members of the military, travel for short-term stays at military bases, sometimes due to war. The movement of things will be best discussed by sharing the imports and exports of Afghanistan with other countries. Foreign trade is primarily controlled by the government or government monopolies. Exports of Afghanistan include natural gas, dried fruit, carpets, wool, cotton, and fresh fruit. Afghanistan imports petroleum products, vehicles, textiles, and various foods. Some go to the countries that do a lot of importing and exporting of goods with Afghanistan are Pakistan, Germany, India, Russia, and Great Britain. Foreign aid is another way that the United States is interconnected to Afghanistan. The United States has given not only economic assistance, but also military assistance to cover years dating back as far as the 1970s. More than $10 billion from the United States went to Afghanistan in 2012 alone. When comparing this aid to the aid that the United States gave other regions, the numbers are quite staggering. So much information has just been presented to you, and we truly hope that you have enjoyed listening to and learning more about the Afghan culture, Afghanistan refugees, as well as PTSD. Our references are included following this presentation. The references included in our project were chosen based on their accuracy and academic scholarship. Thank you so much for your time, and we hope you have enjoyed learning more about PTSD and Afghan refugees.